people. He says that today the religious, you have to find them even among people in jeans and t-shirts. Which means those of you today who have not come in your religious garb, I think we have to bring this back with us and say, how does it affect me? So in our society, Singapore, we know that there are, at least on the IRO, if you are not aware of, we have 10 different religions. But there are many more that's not on the IRO. And there are many different also what we call spiritual movements. They'll say, no, I'm not a Hindu, but I belong to a spiritual group, right? So if we make our way around to the temples, the mosques, the churches and all that, we see believers expressing their faith, their devotion in different religious settings. And we recognize actually that there are similarities in the way that religions are organized. So this is just an overview. I'll bring you through. Fundamentally, we find that in religions there are 4 fundamental pillars, the main pillars, that hold religions together. And there is a thread that runs through. So first, for example, you see the creed present. The creed is a statement of faith that describes the belief shared by a religious community. And you'll notice that religious creed are not intended to be comprehensive. Sometimes it's just a one line. For example, in Christianity, we have the Apostles' Creed. Basically, in the creed for the Christian, we profess the belief in the Trinity. God the Father, Jesus as the Son of God, and the Holy Spirit. For the Muslims, the Shahada is the declaration that there is no God but God. And Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, is a messenger of God for the Muslims. In Judaism, the one phrase that says, I am the Lord your God. It carries the recognition of God as supreme and creator above all creatures. So if we are to look, for example, into our respective belief, you find that we have this element of the creed, right? That kind of captures what we believe. Then there is the code. The code of conduct refers to the manner, character, and proper behavior that individual, group, or society holds as authoritative in distinguishing between right and wrong. Such code of conduct is used in a given culture, religion, or community. And very often, this code is transmitted orally, and it governs human behavior. The third of the pillar, the community. You find that in all religions, there's always a gathering of people who profess the same belief. So a religious community is a gathering of people who practice the same religion. And like in Singapore, in a wider sense, we find members of one religion living near or intermingling with members of other religions in everyday life. But when we worship separately. We never come together to worship. Okay? Then the fourth pillar is what we call the cult or rituals, right? In every religion, there is some form of rituals carried out by the community. So the word refers to homage paid to a deity. It derives from the Latin cultus, meaning worship. And worship is a religious act, usually directed towards a deity. It implies an act of honor shown to an object. And then you find that within these 4 C's that I mentioned earlier, we have a hierarchy of leaders. And you recognize that even within your own religious community, you have basically these 4 groups of people. The theologian who gives the conceptual framework to help believers understand the creed. Okay? It's the theologian's work to do that. Then we have the priests, the imams, right? Pastors, and so forth. So they are the officers who conduct the rites and lead in worship. So through the rituals, believers feel a sense of connectedness to the divine. Then under the code, we have the teachers of law, or the lawgivers. They are the ones who are appointed and given responsibility to interpret the code and core norms in the light of experience. And then when there's a community of people, there is always people in authority. So they are the officials who hold the religious heritage together and give the believers a sense of belonging. So the religious leader is there to hold, in a way, the community together. And yet you find that even though religions are centered around this, there is also the problem when our sacred landscape is infiltrated and you find that it doesn't always solve its function. What do we see? Religions are threatened very often when the ism comes in. You know, sometimes it is the law that takes over and then we forget about where people are. So the ism, once it comes in, we find that symbols and icons becomes idols. Okay? They are the end in itself. So what happens is that in the creed, danger arises when dogmaticism creeps in and certain concept becomes infallible and unchangeable. And the language in the creed becomes cast in stone. All right, so sometimes you say, no, we cannot change. Even if the young people doesn't understand anymore, it doesn't matter. Because it is in the creed, we cannot change. Then you find that the young people will feel that it's not relevant for us. The code itself can become legalistic, where blind adherence to the letter of the law rules the day. People no longer becomes important. Then the community is endangered when institution becomes more important than the individual members. And then in cult, it becomes dangerous when rituals lose their significance and are followed blindly. In one of the books, there was this story about the priest in a temple will always tie up the cat when they are going to have the worship. He will get his followers to tie up the cat. Then over time, the cat died. So they went around to look for another cat. So for as long as there is no cat, there's no worship, because the cat has to be caught, it has to be tied up. And eventually what they found out, the reason why the cat was being tied up was because earlier they had to do it because the cat was disturbing the people during their devotion. So this is what we meant by following it blindly without knowing why it was done. So to break the danger of ism, there is a need to maintain the balance of the 2 dimensions. Okay, now, we are not saying that these 4 C's, the creed, cult, community, and code, are not important. They are important. But we need to look at it holistically so that we need to maintain this balance in that relationship. In the horizontal dimension, we see person-to-person relationship. Okay? And that in the vertical, we find that it is between God and the individual person. So at the horizontal level, what will happen is if a person maintains that spiritual dimension and is in communion with another person, the person becomes a prophet. And then we'll hear why is the person a prophet. On the vertical dimension, the person lives an intimate relationship with God or the divine. And this person we recognize as the mystic. So at the core of our belief, our religion, what is fundamental is our religious experience. Some calls it spirituality, others call it contemplation. Right? Because if you are saying, I have a religion, it is not enough. It is not enough just to follow the religion, to do what I have to do. But it is to bring ourselves to a very fundamental, at the core of my faith, my religion, there must be a religious experience. And some of us, in today's language, some will say, oh, I don't have a religion, but I have a spirituality. Others will say, I contemplate, right? These are interchangeable. So when we speak of religiosity and spirituality, we acknowledge the existence of a spiritual realm. Yet we tend to separate the two because the former, what we call religiosity, is very often saddled with everything negative. And the latter, which is an in thing today, is everything positive. So you hear very often people say, I don't have a religion, right? But I have a spirituality. Can we have one without the other? I think important is to keep that question in mind. So is there a distinction between a religious person and a spiritual person? In reality, religion is spiritual and spirituality is religious. Okay? Religion is spiritual and spirituality is religious. When we are talking, remember earlier on I mentioned that when we are talking about religions, it is not just talking about the 4 C's. Creed in itself, code in itself, cult in itself, community in itself. But at the core of all this is the religious experience. So whether we call it religion or spirituality, there's an interplay of religion is a spiritual experience. Or if you say, well, I don't have religion, but I'm spiritual, then we'll say that, well, you also have a religious experience. Okay? So spirituality is a form of religion, but often seen as private and personal. So they say, I don't need to go to the temple, I don't need to go to the mosque, I don't need to go to the church. I'll go to the seaside, I'll go to the mountain, I go to the gardens, right? To find this quiet. But is that enough? Spirituality is seen as private and personal. Religiosity tends to incorporate public rituals and organized doctrines, and perhaps sometimes too much of it, too much of emphasis. So the line between the two is not clear and distinct, but both Both, mind you, do point to a belief system. Neither religion nor spirituality is better or worse than the other. Both are means to an end. All right? It is not the end. It is only a means to an end. They are not the end in themselves, but will bring meaning to life. When I search for something deeper and I find meaning in my life. So religiosity and spirituality help us to keep a healthy balance when we face the paradox of life that I will speak about later. Why is religion then losing its attraction? I have even young Catholics, not even sometimes young Catholics, you know. I even have the more mature Catholics coming to me and say, you know, the Mass and all that is so boring, there's no meaning. I prefer to do other things on a Sunday. And maybe even in many of the other faiths. You find, for example, although we say, oh, we have 10,000 members, but the active ones are usually, we say 20%, right? Some may come because they feel that it is an obligation. After the obligation, I go back to my secular life. So people may be practicing their religions, but they still feel empty and unfulfilled. Another group may be disillusioned with religion and they stop practicing. But they say, I am very spiritual, because they find space to be by themselves. It doesn't matter what is going on with the world. It doesn't matter what is happening to my neighbor, but I'm off to find that space for myself. Is that enough? I believe that both are necessary. Spirituality and religion must go hand in hand. So religion and spirituality are mutually inclusive. Each person must have the horizontal and the vertical dimension as he lives his life. He cannot be a prophet without being a mystic, and a mystic without being a prophet. So who is a prophet? Who is a prophet? A prophet is one who speaks for the poor. He is the voice for the conscience of others. You know, he reminds us that we have not done our duty. He reminds us to free the captives, to show compassion to the oppressed, the marginalized, and the weak. And he reminds us that laws are meant to show God's justice and mercy. Equally important to external observances is the development of interior spirituality. So the mystic instead nurtures the contemplative dimension. Okay? So here I'm saying, the earlier point, the prophet feels that he has his role. He is there to remind everybody, all of us, right? We have a duty. Okay? But it doesn't matter where that voice is coming from. I'm telling you what you have to do. The mystic instead will, for the mystic, important is that I find that contemplative silence. It is in silence that the presence of the sacred unfolds. In listening to the heart, the mystic encourages the prophet to action. So when we are talking about this mystic and prophet, it is within us. It is these two dimensions that each one of us have to find. I cannot just be one or the other. All right? That's the imbalance. In our Canossian spirituality, our founders will remind us, we have to be an anchorite, like an anchorite at home, right? That's when we find the contemplative dimension. And when we are out in the world, we have to be a contemplative in action. It is my faith that spurs me on. So, people lose respect for religious leaders, and we see quite often, it's in the news almost every week. Down through the history of religions, it was true that we find some of these religious, whom we acknowledge as prophets or mystics, who fall short of expectations of people. We find them in headlines for the wrong reason. You know, of late, again, we do read of them in our papers. Similarly, the religious find themselves in religious deserts, thirsting for spiritual oasis. And there was one day when I was sharing with Mr. Zainul and Ustaz Ali, and I was saying, even as a religious myself, I have to be very careful to find that balance, because I can either swing one way or the other, and I'll find myself doing work. We're all very busy with work. I think none of us here can say that we have time. If we are here, it's because we make time, right? Which means that we can actually make time to live our spiritual dimension. If this is important for us, we are here, we're making time. So as a religious, I'm telling you from my experience that if I lose my focus and start to want everything that the world is telling me that I must have, then the attraction to idolatry is overwhelming. Last year, Venerable Thero was sharing about how, even now, what Android, iPhone 3, 4, 5, and then iPad, and then there's no end. And you find that sometimes even before I get to learn to use my new phone, I'm already queuing up for the next one. It doesn't matter whether it's 4 or 5 hours, but I must get my hand on that latest gadget. So that becomes my idolatry, and it can be very overwhelming. And I think we all remember that we have the 5 C's that Singaporeans desire: cash, condominium, car, credit card, and country club. In yesterday's newspaper, it says that the leases of the country clubs are going. Maybe we will end up with 4. Then we will put in a 5 after that. That's more important. Okay? So perhaps these are the paradox of life. So the paradox of life, and we are familiar with this. We have taller buildings but shorter tempers, wider freeways but narrower viewpoints, more to spend but enjoy less, bigger houses and smaller families, more conveniences but less time, more degrees but less sense, more knowledge and less judgment, more experts and yet more problems, more medicine but less wellness, modern skyscrapers, but we're all emotionally and spiritually in the slums. So you see, this is what is happening in our life, right? And sometimes we have people coming up to say, I am so stressed. And then you tell them, take a break. They say, no, I cannot. And very often I'll tell them, if you can't and you break down, the world will still go on. You break down, you end up probably in IMH, right? But the world will still go on. So we drink and smoke too much, spend recklessly, laugh too little, drive too fast, get too angry, stay up too late, get up too tired, read too little, watch too much TV, the potato couch, and pray too seldom. We have multiplied our possessions, but lost our values. We talk too much, love too seldom, and hate too often. So you find that sometimes at one time or other, we do find ourselves caught in this, right? Maybe even the retired, the so-called retired people. I always say the retired people are even more tired. Because everybody thinks that they are retired, they have got more time to do a lot of other things. And then they say, I have no time. They have more time when they were working. So we have gone to the moon and back, but have trouble crossing the street to meet a new neighbor, or even our neighbor next door. We've conquered outer space, but not inner space. We've done larger things, but not better things. We have conquered atom. We want to be God, but not our prejudice. We write more, but learn less. We plan more, but accomplish less. We've learned to rush, but not to wait. We've built computers to hold more information, to produce more copies than ever, but we communicate less and less. And it is true that earlier on when I was sitting with Mr. Zainul, and he says, some people are wondering, should we send out, for example, all these cards when the festive season comes along? Or should we just send a mass email, And yet, I think those of us who find a card in our post box, although the post box inside there would have already collected lots of cobwebs because there are no mails really coming, except Vivek was saying he's quite happy also to receive the bills. But I think even that, when we have a card, you know that we are specially remembered and not just send a mass mail. So, how to recover our spirituality, our religious experience? Who is the mystic and who can be a prophet? Do we see ourselves asking these questions? Do we find ourselves desiring to have this balance in our life? The horizontal dimension where I am with people all the time, working with others, relating with people, and yet do I find that there are moments when I am drawn to spend time with myself, with my God? So first, let us try to unravel the paradox. When I spoke about the 5 C's earlier, right? The credit card, the car, the cash, the condo, the country club. I think it's very important that all of us, even if we don't have the 5 C's and we're still struggling to try and get hold of the 5 C's, I think the 6th C is very important. Contemplation. Contemplation is one way to keep ourselves on a spiritual course. Stay connected at all levels on the spiritual track. So even if we have not acquired the 5 C's, the 6th C, contemplation, all right, to seek meaning in life probably is an answer to many of our life's ill. So what is contemplation and what is connectedness? It goes hand in hand. In the words of St. Ignatius of Loyola, a great saint in the church, he mentions that we need to find God in all things and all things in God. We need to find the spiritual in the secular in the spiritual. We cannot live our life so dichotomized, so split, like as if we are two different persons. So when I am in holy place, I do the holy. And we always laugh among ourselves, Catholics. Maybe the rest of you don't have this problem. The minute when Sunday Mass is over, we leave the church, we'll be fighting in a car park. It's a very common thing, in our churches. I don't know about the rest of you. And then the priest will always have to say, we have to exercise patience. We have to show that, the worship that we do in church is being carried out there. Don't get so short-tempered, all right? So we need to find that even in that car park space, when I have to wait for another 45 minutes caught there, I still have to find my God. Okay? Sit in the car and connect with my spiritual life. So we saw earlier how we are wired up everywhere, connected with a touch of a button. But are we really connected to what is important in our lives? Are we connected with God, the divine, others, self, and creation? The religious or the spiritual person, like us, in robes, habits, or, like the majority of you, in jeans and t-shirts. We need to contemplate and connect to discover our religion at a deeper level. So if you profess to believe in God, do you have the courage to open your eyes and move on with life, despite the circumstances? Do you dare to place one foot in front of the other and walk the scorched earth under our feet, to be in touch with reality? Are we aware of miracles everywhere? Your smile, when you look at yourself in a mirror, do I say, thank God for the beautiful me? Or do I say, oh, another acne pimple coming up, or I should have some operations and all that to improve my look, or I should get to the London weight management, or I should get to Gene and I don't know what, right? Do we see the miracle of the sun in our hair, the stars at night, the water we drink, the food we eat, birds and